Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Samaritan Anglican Church podcast. I'm your host, Father Dan Shoemake, and I'm so excited to present to you today this incredible interview that I got to do with Kevin and Leah Kadwell. Kevin and Leah served for a ministry in India called Good Shepherd India for about 25 years and have blessed the world through their incredible missionary work. I got to sit down with them on a Friday night and discuss the history of their ministry, how they got there, and the work that they're doing even now in India. So I don't know if you personally have much history of listening to missionaries talk. The way that the missions field works outside the United States is astounding and is incredibly motivational for me. I hope it will be for you to hear the story of what the Kadwells have been through and changing the world one person at a time. So without any further ado, here is episode 11. Put that together, that idea or that conversation. And so we introduce each of those three streams, Catholicism, Charismania, or Pentecostalism, and evangelicalism. And then on Tuesday, we talked about how they work to sort of bolster one another, but also serve as a check to one another also. And it was just like the most satisfying thing because I just really... Can you guys do me a favor? If this turns blue, will you tell me? Because it means it's not recording like it ought to. But this has been so satisfying for me because most people I meet are one of these three, or maybe two of these three. Right. And so I know people who pray their rosaries. Mm-hmm. I know people who play their guitars. Yeah. And I know people who preach really hard. But I don't know anybody who thinks we got to do all three of these things. And I really mean it. We should be doing synthesizers with tons of incense all at the same time. And anyway, so that's what I'm trying to, that's what I want to do in the podcast is just talk about that. So, as you can tell, I'm a little jazzed about that whole conversation.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the reason we know about the three streams is because that's what the Good Shepherd Church of India is built on.
Right.
And so that was so important to Bishop D'Souza because he had also seen that people were leaving one or more out.
Yeah.
And so he was very much about the fact that he wanted that Catholicism, that union of all of the churches with the rest of the world. He wanted the charismatic portion because he saw how God and the Holy Spirit was so alive and at work, especially among the Indian church. Yeah. And then, of course, he wanted the evangelicalism to be, firmly rooted in the Bible, that this is what we're teaching, this is the gospel, that kind of thing. And so it was very important for him when we were choosing the Anglican tradition that it be that convergence model of the three streams. And that was so important. Yeah.
So I'd love to, I don't know if this is worthwhile for y'all's time, because I really want to just learn about, because I just think missionaries' voices need to be lifted up, especially in America, where suffering is not having your iPhone for an hour. But I'd love to hear how that model sort of played itself out in y'all's life, because I just meet so many people who are very quick to pish-posh one of the three, and I just... increasingly, and I don't know if I'm convincing myself, I see them as so essential. Every single one is integral. Right. If you're not seeing miracles, why would people believe? Right. If you're not part of the historic tradition of the Catholic Church, how do you know you're not going off the rails? And if you're not basing it in the truth of the scriptures, what do you really believe in the first place?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, we were both brought up in a very conservative background, which did not allow for the three streams.
Yeah.
Which was all that we believed could be true.
Sure.
There were no other ways for us to believe. And so when we entered into India, God must have been laughing because he must have said, okay, hold on to your seats because I'm going to show you actually how I work in the world. Yeah. And long before the Good Shepherd Church was born, long before we embraced the Anglican tradition and before we truly understood what these three streams were, God was showing us already how the Holy Spirit was alive and well and at work. I mean, I know that on our first trip to India, we saw God heal people. And that was like the first time we had ever really seen that.
Yeah.
You know, they were telling us, go out and pray for these people, lay your hands on these people, and lo and behold, people got healed.
Yeah.
And we were like, whoa, what just happened?
Right.
And we
Can't
would go,
talk about this
We're
back at church.
We're Baptists.
I know.
This isn't working.
Exactly. And so we go home and people are like, oh yeah, it was probably
right.
fake.
They got healed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. How can you tell? You know, but you know, we saw it with our own eyes. We could tell the story. And then we started hearing stories about people who would like bring their water buffalo to the pastor because the water buffalo wasn't giving milk or wasn't having babies. And so they would pray for the water buffalo, anoint it with oil and lay hands on the water buffalo. And God cares about that family so much that he would heal the water buffalo and it would start giving milk or have a baby or something like that because God cares for the poor. And God doesn't want the poor to suffer. And so he would heal that water buffalo. I mean, I know we pray for our dogs here in America, right? We don't want our dogs to suffer.
Yeah, I do sort of, but I get that.
You know. And so we saw all about how the Holy Spirit was alive and well and at work. And so our own thoughts began to change and began to morph and began to expand. And our view of the Bible, which we had always thought was so cut and clear and dry, and this is how it is, and we know exactly what the Bible says, all of a sudden we were like, maybe we don't know exactly what the Bible says.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some mystery in the Bible. Maybe God hasn't revealed everything to us.
Wow.
And maybe there's still something out there that God has to show us. Maybe there's, maybe there's other parts of the world that have yet to reveal these biblical truths.
Yeah.
And won't it be so exciting? And then we began to realize that that third stream, that the church, one Catholic, Holy Church, is actually all of us together around the world.
Yeah.
And that there were believers, in our experience, in India, who were no lesser believers than there were in America.
Yeah.
You know, I think there had been this this mentality in America specifically, that's what we can speak to, that, you know, here we are in America, Christians, we're the ones with all the knowledge.
Right.
We're the ones who know how to exegete the scriptures. Right. We're the ones who know all the things. And so now and we were probably guilty of this as well, we're the ones who are going to go to India and we're going to show those Christians how to live and how to train them and how to do all the things.
Yeah.
And then we get there as 20-somethings and we're like, oh, we need to be poured into now because these Christians know Jesus at such a different level than we ever thought we could. And so it was this church around the world that knows Jesus in such a different way because of their experiences, because of the way that they had to experience him in their poverty, in their richness, in all of the different things that God had given to them that we never knew existed. And really, there was not an inequality. There was a beautiful equality in the way that the church around the world was there. And again, we saw it for the very first time, and our eyes were brilliantly opened to that for the first time.
And I think part of that was also being comfortable with not having to explain it all.
Yeah.
I don't have to understand it all. I've seen it enough to know that this is real and genuine and valid.
Yeah.
And I don't have to have all the answers to be able to say, but what we did have with that background of the church that we grew up in and that tradition was to be able to look at Scripture and say, is what I'm seeing in contrast to the Scripture?
Right.
Because if it's not, I'm okay with it. If I see something that's not in alignment with Scripture, then I should be worried.
Yeah.
But I have to be able to let go of some of that tradition that I'd grown up in and be able to just simply accept this and say, I'm comfortable enough to say, I don't have to understand it all. I can accept it.
Yeah.
This is how God is moving and working, and it is undeniable.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think in this country, and maybe in other countries around the world, the Western world, we have this addiction to certainty.
Yeah.
And we want to know all the answers. We love to be right. We want to know exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
And until we break that addiction to certainty, we're really not open to what God has to say to us.
Yeah.
And that's one of the huge lessons that we learned living overseas in India, where nothing is certain in India.
Yeah.
I mean, our schedules were never certain. The schools were maybe open one day, closed the next day. The stores might be open, they might be closed. The government might be open, might be closed. You never knew it was going to happen, and that didn't bother anyone.
Yeah.
Except us.
Right.
And so until we were able to embrace that uncertainty and realize that uncertainty is fine, it's okay,
Yeah.
were we able to then finally see the Bible with new eyes, see God's work with new eyes, see God's people with new eyes, and see that that uncertainty is actually a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And break that addiction to uncertainty, which we don't like here in this country.
Right.
We want things to be certain. And I think only when we can embrace that uncertainty can we actually then step into what God has for us.
Right. I have a friend who was a missionary in the Middle East, in a couple different countries in the Middle East for a while, and he would say to me that the great virtue that we have in the West, that's also our greatest downfall, is this independence, this entrepreneurial nature, that we see so much of our identity in our stuff, our freedoms, blah, 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 blah. Where he sees the great virtue of the Middle East is hospitality, where someone will spend very little money on food or even on their house, but they'll spend a lot of money on a tea set because their honor is in buying stuff. What would you say is the virtue of India?
Oh, absolutely. Hospitality and relationship. Number one, relationship. And that was something that we learned maybe the hard way. Kevin here.
We made a few mistakes along the way. That's the nice way of saying it.
So Kevin here is very good at relationships. He can talk to anybody for any amount of time about any topic, which I highly value in many situations. I'm not so much that way. I'm more of an introvert. I like my alone time. I'm really bad at small talk. Of course, get me on a deep subject and we're good.
Done. Right.
But in India, the folks were so relational, and they love to live close together. If you're in a big auditorium, like if you go to a movie theater and all the seats are empty because you've arrived there 20 minutes early, and you go and you choose your seat, the next person, if it's an Indian, will come in and they will sit right next to you. They won't go and sit somewhere else. They will sit right next to you because they value relationship. They value connections with one another. Yeah. And it's a very they love communication. They love to talk to one another. They love gossip.
Shared experiences.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. They love to be chatting with their neighbors. I mean, everybody knows everybody's business.
Yeah.
I mean, there's very little privacy.
Yeah.
We would have folks who would come over from America to stay for a month or two, and they would want to have their own room with a closed door and all of that. And the Indians would be like, "You don't want to come sit in my room with me and talk to me until 2 a.m?" And they'd be like, "No, I need my own space." And Indians have no concept of privacy because that's just not how things work there. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. They share everything, which is beautiful. Yeah. And we didn't really learn that lesson very quickly. And people noticed it. One of the big things that people love to do in India is just drop by your house unannounced. And it's fully accepted, and that it's great. You drop by, you serve them tea, and we knew this, and so I always had tea ready and always had little cookies available. But nobody ever dropped by our house for tea. And I was just like, why is this not happening? And I thought maybe they're just afraid to drop by because our American culture, they know we don't really do that in America. But then I figured out it was because we never dropped by anyone else's house. Wow. And so they figured out that we weren't interested in developing relationships with them, and so they were afraid to develop relationships with us. Yeah. And how tragic that was, because all we had to do was just follow their lead and go for some tea at their house, and then we would have had a line of visitors at our house, which is exactly what we wanted. Yeah. But no, we sat alone in our house and waiting and waiting and waiting and hoping someone would call, hoping someone would drop by, and it never happened. now that we're here in the U.S., we realize that we did absorb a lot of that relational ability.
Yeah.
And people consider us very relational now. But it was a hard road in getting there.
Yeah. So maybe we should take a step back. So none of my people know who you guys are yet. So can you start like introducing yourselves, maybe telling me about a bit your childhood?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in southwestern Michigan, saved through the Christian Reformed Church, which I know sounds somewhat
CRC?
ironic.
Yep.
Not many people that would say they got saved through the Christian Reformed Church, but
The oldest denomination in the world.
yeah,
Or in the country, rather.
yeah, and so that was up my early upbringing, and then moved out to the West Coast. Started attending a conservative Baptist church in the Portland area, and that was most of my growing up years. Was there in the Pacific Northwest, and the church that we were attending was a very missions-minded, very active in a lot of different, not only supporting a lot of missionaries, but started doing short-term mission trips and so on. And Leah and I were both working at the church at the time. And that's where we met and got to know one another, and we'd both gone on different short-term trips independent. And then when we got married in the mid-90s, we ended up going to India for the first time together just 2 months after we'd gotten married. And
Cool.
so people, oh, what a great honeymoon. And well, no, it wasn't a honeymoon. And but it was very, very clear, independent of one another. In the first few days that we were in India, God had made very, very clear to us that India was in our future.
Wow.
And so, as a newly married couple, and I remember sitting down and having to try to figure out, how am I going to tell my wife I know I'm coming back here?
Yeah.
And little did I know, she was having the same thoughts of, this is in our future. And so it was very, very affirming, very comforting, actually, to know that God had spoken to each one of us individually in that way. And
How long were y'all there the first time, right after your marriage?
about 3 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, and we came back from that trip, and we told, people invariably, how was your trip to India? And we'd say, it was hot, it was dirty,
Right.
it was smelly, the food was weird,
Yeah.
and I can't wait to go back.
Yeah.
Why would you want to go back to a place
Right.
like that? The look of confusion on their face, and we'd say it's the people.
Yeah.
It's the people that we were so drawn to.
Yeah.
And so that really began then the journey of us as a newly married couple, then essentially going fish swimming upstream. We were doing everything opposite of our friends. We were getting rid of stuff. We were trying to sell stuff. We were eliminating debt. All of our friends were buying houses and getting a better car and chasing a better job, and we were doing exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
And so that was then the part of our journey.
Now, if I remember right, Leah, like most people I know who are missionaries, they find some mission organization to sponsor them and get all their sponsors through. Did you guys have an organization that was sponsoring you when you first went over there?
Well, we did, but it was a little bit different because what we did is on one of our early trips to India, we actually met who is now Archbishop Joseph D'Souza, Good Shepherd Church of India. And he invited us to come and work directly with what was then Operation Mobilization India.
Okay.
And we actually had an American organization that seconded us directly to the work in India.
Okay.
And so that was, again, kind of a new model. And, some people were doing that, but it wasn't very popular. And so we immediately came under the leadership of the Indians from day one.
Awesome.
And that was very, very good because it was almost a new paradigm in that we were no longer the American experts who were coming in to lead the Indians.
Right.
We were the American novices who were saying, we want to come in under the Indian experts and let you mentor us, guide us, lead us, do everything, and we will learn from you.
Yeah.
And just tell us how we can help.
Yeah. And that's what we did. We played behind the scenes roles, and when I even look back, I can't remember what we did for the first several years because the work was very small at that time, and God was getting ready to do something huge, but He hadn't done it yet. And we spent a lot of time just learning culture and that kind of thing.
So what year did y'all officially move?
We moved there in 1998.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so when you went that sort of permanent, to do it full time. Was that immediately under Archbishop Joseph?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, working directly with him. And I spent the first few years, they had a national training program They had about 400 young people that were going through training seminars, teaching them how to become evangelism, church planting, a bunch of different things that they were learning. It was a very structured, which actually Bishop D'Souza was very instrumental in consolidating that training program. So it was definitely a passion of his to train these young people. So I was doing that, and then she was actually working directly with him on communications, and essentially the ministry was already growing at that point, but they were having a hard enough time relating not only to international donors, but telling the story of what God was doing in India, even in those early years. Yeah. And so that was a lot of what Leah was doing, is working directly with him and saying, here's how we get this word out. Yeah. People need to know this. I mean, we had donors that used to say, you guys have the greatest story not yet told. Yeah. And because even then, God was doing amazing things. Yeah.
And it was fun to see how God had prepared me to go into that role, because I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and had grown up, again, in a really conservative background, had gone to Christian school, K through 12, moved to New York State, upstate New York, went to Ithaca College for my bachelor's degree, got a degree in marketing and international business, which now today I know God used very specifically, to work into the communications and marketing and fundraising that I do today. And then I moved out to Portland, Oregon, which at that time, my brain still thought they traveled around in covered wagons. I don't understand why I thought that.
Oregon Trail. That's what we all know about Oregon.
Right. That's right. But I knew no one there. And so this was, again, I just got a job out in Portland. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to move out there. And just took a risk. And that's where I went to the church that Kevin was at. We met and got married. And then God just... When we were in India, God used all those skills that I had learned growing up and in college and even in the working world before we moved to India to really redeem those skills for the kingdom as we started work in India. And little did we know, though, that what God was doing in India was about to explode. Yeah. And we were so excited because... about 45 days after we arrived in India, a huge wave of persecution against Christians broke out. And we were like, what in the world is going on? What have we done? We've just committed our lives to live here in India, and now is it not going to be safe for us to live here? Yeah. And this was around the same time that there was an Australian missionary named Graham Staines, and he and his dear wife had been living in North India, serving faithfully for many, many years. They had 2 young sons, and a bunch of religious fanatics trapped Graham and his 2 young sons in a Jeep and burned them to death. Yeah. It was a very sad story. They actually became kind of national heroes because a lot of folks saw how unmerited this was. And they became, just people really looked up to the Staines family then as kind of heroes for the faith. But that was really the thing that ignited a lot of this persecution against Christians. And it turns out that a lot of this persecution was because at the same time, Christians had been reaching out to a lot of the people who were at the lower part of the Hindu caste system. Yeah. So the Hindu caste system is divided into 4 different castes, and the upper 3 castes are called the high caste. Yeah. And they have all the privileges, all the money, all the power in all of Indian society. And then the 4th caste is what's called the low caste, and they have none of the power, none of the money, none of the opportunities or privileges. And then there are even people who are below that, who have even less, the untouchables, And so Christians had been working with the low caste and the untouchables, and the upper caste people didn't like that the Christians were reaching out to these folks. Yeah. And so the upper caste people, the fanatics, the radicalized upper caste people, started persecuting the Christians for the work they were doing among the low caste people. And this went on for about 4 or 5 years until the low caste people realized this huge wave was going on, and they got fed up, and they said, we're going to band together as low caste people, and we're going to make a philosophical break away from the Hindu caste system. Wow. And we're going to, as a people, all like 400, 500 million of us, philosophically break away from Hinduism and embrace other religious ideologies that will give us freedom and dignity and have a life full of compassion and all of this. And so Bishop D'Souza was actually at this huge rally that they had. There were about 500,000 people there. This is in November of 2001. And we were there also. We were so privileged to be able to be there. And Bishop D'Souza got on the stage and he said, you know what? Today you're going to embrace many different religions. Maybe you'll embrace Buddhism or Islam or Christianity or Sikhism. Whatever religion you decide to embrace, we as Christians support you. Yeah. We support you in your choice. We support you in solidarity. We want you to be free. And that statement by him meant so much to the untouchable people, to the low caste people, because previously they had only heard Christians say, you must choose Christianity or you're going to hell. Yeah. And this stance of solidarity meant so much to them that they did two things. Number one, a lot of them chose Christianity on that day, which was fantastic. And some of them who didn't eventually turned to Christianity because they just saw this love that overrode everything. The other thing that they did was that they invited Christians on a national level to educate the low caste children, which was a huge open door for us to just show these low caste people the love, compassion, dignity, and equality of Jesus. And we accepted that opportunity on behalf of Christians everywhere. Yeah. And it really was just such a great opportunity to just show the love of Jesus to people who had never experienced it before. And that was probably the key turning point in the ministry that we had experienced up until that point, when everything just exploded and went forward in such a huge way that you could tell that this was a movement of God and it was not going to turn back.
Christianity in America, especially over the past 60 years or so, has become a place where you go to church on a Sunday, wear your Sunday best. If you got a nice hat, ladies, you're welcome. But other than that, we have these private lives outside of church. Right. It seems like what y'all have done in India is create not just a Sunday church attendance policy, but an entire culture surrounding the church.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, the identity, and I think that's part of the key to it, is when their identity shifts from I've been called a Hindu all my life, and now I am calling myself a Christian, a follower of Jesus, that identity changes everything. And it doesn't just affect, we can compartmentalize so easy. Yeah. Here's my work life, here's my family life, here's my, and we have all these little boxes that we put portions of our lives in. And for Indians, that just doesn't make sense. Yeah. And so for them, it was that core identity of here's who I am, and that identity changes everything about me. And it really is a completely different culture shift for them. Yeah. To be able to embrace that. And the other thing that I think is very interesting, we were talking earlier about the community aspect, that Indians love community and relationship, and that plays out in conversion as well. When they accept Christ, it's less the cognitive, I understand the claims of Christ, I've researched it, I've studied it, and I'm making a cognitive choice to believe. Yeah. But they as a group to come together and say, we have seen this Jesus that you've presented, and we are choosing together to follow this Jesus. Yeah. And it's such a different experience. And so we read about it in Scripture, and 3,000 were added to their number, 5,000. And, we had times where we were sitting in Bishop's office and, talking about whatever it was on the agenda for that particular meeting, and he would get a call and we're listening to his side of the conversation. Yeah, it's okay. We'll take care of it. We'll send somebody. And he'd hang up the phone and so it's what was that? Oh, it was the leader of a village in North India in this one particular state, and they have 25,000 people that want to accept Christ. And we're kind of looking around the room did that just really just happen? And you kind of forget at times that it became normal for us. Yeah. But it really was something very, very special that was happening. And it aligned with what Scripture showed us and tells us. And so we could move on it comfortably. We'd never seen it before. Yeah. But we could experience it and say, this is how God is moving. And that identity piece of we as a community are coming to faith in Christ was very different than what we here in the West would typically say. It needs to be a very cognitive, personal,
independent.
It was, and that just wasn't that. I mean, it was very community oriented, but that also brings strength with it.
Yeah.
Because they have one another to rely on. I'm not a lone ranger in this.
Yeah.
And, the animal world, I tell people the animal world teaches us an awful lot, because, even as a small child and you watch National Geographic and you see the lion, what does the lion do? He tries to separate one from the herd.
Yeah.
Either the sick or the weak or whatever. And as soon as one peels off from the herd,
gone.
Know that one's dead.
Yeah.
And even small kids can identify he's dead.
Yeah.
And that community aspect, I think we sometimes forget that community aspect, that identity of here's who we are as a community, is so important.
Yeah.
And that's definitely true in India. They've embraced the community aspect of their faith life in ways that we just don't understand here.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like, from the way that you used, this idea of them saying to Bishop D'Souza, we want you to teach our kids too. That I'm assuming that means not just Sunday school on Sunday mornings. So you guys took over a whole educational system.
Correct, exactly. We were able to start schools, basically K through 12 schools.
Wow.
And we do have to follow the government curriculum.
Right.
But what's different about our schools is that our teachers teach in a Christian worldview, which means they don't have a Bible class,
right,
but they teach in the love of Jesus, which means they treat the children with love and compassion and dignity and equality, which is something that these low caste and untouchable children are not used to, because that's not in the Hindu worldview.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden they're being treated as equals to everyone else in the classroom. Yeah. They're allowed to sit at the front of the class, they're called on, their papers are graded equally and fairly, and they're allowed to graduate, go to college, get jobs as teachers, engineers, and doctors and public servants, which was something they could never dream about before.
Yeah.
I remember when we first started the schools, we were there. We would go up and they had built a school right on the campus where we used to live, and we would start to talk to the little kids, as they would come for class, and they were learning English, and so we would go and say, "Oh, well, what do you want to be when you grow up?" The typical thing that you ask every kindergarten child. And here in America, when you ask that child, so they have an answer.
Firefighter, astronaut.
Exactly. These children had no answer. They couldn't, it's not that they didn't know the English word, it's that they didn't have a dream for the future because they were not allowed to dream. They could become a rock breaker like their father, they could become an agricultural worker like their mother, something like that, but they were not allowed to dream. Yeah. And so as they would go through school, they'd go to 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. By the time they were in 6th or 7th grade, you could go and ask them the same question, and then finally they would say, I want to become a teacher, I want to become an engineer, I want to become an astronaut or a cricket player, or something like that. Because the schools, they were treated with such equality that finally they were allowed to dream, and they were allowed to have this vision of the future that was full of possibilities. Yeah. And I love telling that story because that's something that you never really even think about, that children don't know how to dream until we teach them how to dream. Yeah. Which is just a remarkable thing. Yeah. And so we now have 100 of those schools all across the country in almost every state with 27,000 children in them. Oh my goodness. And we've had almost 6,000 children graduate from those schools, go on to college and get all these great jobs. And many of them have then come back to their own villages to then work in those villages as the village doctor or the engineer to help, lay out the village better or, whatever it is, because they have a heart for their own people. They want to serve their families, they want to serve their village because they have that community mindset. Yeah. They don't want to go off and just live in an apartment by themselves in the city. They want to come and live with their family and support their family. And what a joyful thing that is for them to come and then be able to support their people with these new skills that they've learned and turn a whole new generation on to education.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
So, I know just from talking with you in the past, it's not just schools that you guys have started, that you guys have been able to develop sort of industries with through these forms of education. I know you had said that some of your students, when they graduate or while they're in school, they make uniforms. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about what that's like?
Yeah. So this has been a great thing. So there's a huge need for tailors or seamstresses in India because a lot of the women in particular, some of the men too, just have their clothes handmade. That's just a thing that they do. They think it's better quality, it fits them better, it ends up being cheaper, this kind of thing. So there's a huge need for this. And so all along through the years, we've had a very long track record of training women to become seamstresses, to make women and children's clothing. Great. So when we started the schools then, the children needed uniforms to wear to the schools. All children in India, no matter what school, they all wear uniforms. And they needed 2 or maybe 3 pairs of uniforms. And a lot of the children didn't have money to pay for the uniforms, and so we needed to provide them. This is what we do. And so we thought, why don't we put our women who've trained as seamstresses to work to make these uniforms? So we started doing that, again, on a small level, and this kind of thing. Well, a few years ago, maybe 7 years ago or so, we developed what I call a mini garment factory on our main campus at our headquarters. And we employed 60 women, all who come from an at-risk background, at risk for trafficking. And we trained them all to make these school uniforms, all of them the same, and for all 27,000 children in all of the schools.
Times 2 or 3 per year.
Right, so they're making 81,000 uniforms. And what was remarkable is that when we first hired them, the first year, it took them a full year to make 81,000 uniforms. And then we brought in a consultant from the UK, because, everyone should bring in a consultant from the UK. Of course.
Someone with a British accent and a clipboard.
That's right, exactly. And the consultant did their magic, and it cut the production time in half. So they were able to do 81,000 uniforms in 6 months. And then they were able to take for-profit orders from other schools or other industries and make money the rest of the year, which then made the whole unit sustainable. And so we didn't need to take international donations to keep it going. We didn't need to, collect fees from the children for their uniforms. And so the whole thing now just works on this great system. And so these women get paid. They're not at risk for trafficking anymore. And all the children have these beautiful uniforms. And so this is something that we're, continue doing on a bigger scale. And one of the things that we've then done on the next level is that we've partnered with the local Indian government, who has training sessions that they give where they will then issue a government certificate of completion, which with that certificate you can go to any factory or department store or whatever and get a job. And so we're now taking more at-risk women, training them in this new center that we have, getting them this government partnership certificate, and then lining them up with jobs outside. And again, just changing their lives, transforming their lives in ways that they never thought possible, all while their children are in school getting an education so that they don't have to, have the lower level jobs. They'll have the, white collar jobs and, this kind of thing.
And part of it is this whole ecosystem of, the word holistic kind of gets overused at times and misunderstood, but it really is caring for the whole, not only the whole person, but for the whole of the village and the community.
Right.
And so, when we get the kids in school, well, that actually creates a stress for the family because, those are still mouths that have to be fed. But if the kids aren't, earning some little measly amount of money working in a field somewhere or a factory somewhere or something, so the family is actually losing income while the kid is in school. Well, if you address the income issue by increasing, the wife's ability to earn an income to provide for that lost income for her family, but then you end up with some, cultural issues with alcoholism and, the way that the husband would misspend money, and now the wife has better control over the finances of the family, and the whole family is better. And then you add into that the health care and all the other components of that. And it's caring for the whole person and for the whole community and the whole family through all of these different things. And it creates this kind of ecosystem of ministry that feeds off one another. In some cases, we would have churches that would be planted because of a school. In other cases, we would have a school that started because we had a church in that community. And all the different pieces just worked together to create this very holistic, caring, and it was helping people to experience the love of Christ in ways that they'd never experienced before. And dignity is a big word. It's become a key piece of what we're doing in terms of helping people to experience their God-given dignity that has been withheld from them for so long. And that's such a key piece to what the ministry is all about, helping them experience that love of Christ in a dignified way. It isn't charity. it really is love.
Yeah.
And they respond to it. I mean, they just continue to respond to it. So it's amazing to watch.
Now, so Leah, the ladies have got this seamstress job. Kevin, did you guys find a job opportunity for some men also?
So one of the things that we did, and it was number one, job creation, but number two, we were looking at how do we tie this into the schools. So when we were there, we had an IT business that we owned and ran, and we had probably around 50 or so employees, and one of the things that we started was a data entry business. And it wasn't because I had a passion for data entry. It was a means to an end.
Right.
And we were presented with an opportunity to do work for some, let's just call them globally known businesses, huge companies, names that you would immediately recognize. And we were processing certain parts of their paperwork for them and digitizing it, basically. And the idea of that was not only to develop the expertise in that industry, but then to look at, okay, if we backward integrate, is the way that I described it, into the school system, so that by the time a kid comes out of our school, they've learned a marketable skill.
Yes.
And so that started with, okay, if they're going to be good in data entry or in IT in general, they need to know how to operate a computer, how to be proficient at using a keyboard. And, well, that means a certain proficiency in typing speed and in basic math, in understanding English, or at least recognizing English characters and so on. And so then you work backwards from, so we got very, very good at the data entry piece on a commercial level, but then to begin to integrate back into the school and say, if by 10th grade, they're going to have XYZ skills, in first grade, we need to start them with ABC skills so that through that years that they're in school, they have enough hands-on time, whether they work for us or any number of other companies, it doesn't matter. They have a marketable skill. And it was in addition to the education, it was in addition to, but let's make sure that these kids have opportunities that, like she was saying, that they could have never dreamed of. We had graduates from our schools that have gone on to work for Microsoft in India.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, who would have ever dreamed that 20 years ago? It was inconceivable.
Yeah.
And so that was the type of thing that we were always looking at, those opportunities. Yeah. What can we do? What do we have available to us that we could better these people's lives?
Yeah.
And it was never the short game. It was always the long game.
Yeah.
How do we pour into these people? Because we knew, coming back to this conversation of this big meeting in New Delhi in 2001, we knew that this was a generational project.
Yeah.
This was not going to change in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
This is 20, 30, 50 years.
Yeah.
We're pouring into these people's lives because we believe that in the long run, God is going to honor this, and this nation will be different because of it.
Yeah.
Forever different because of it.
So I think one thing, because we're in the West, I've heard so many Christians, I've heard priests say, who doesn't know about Jesus? Why are we still planting churches? And I don't think people know about how incredibly effective and influential Good Shepherd Ministries has been. I did a little reading. Correct me if I'm wrong, that in 1998, the population of Christians in India was a little bit less than 1%. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
And I know that when Good Shepherd Ministries was there, you guys had, 5 churches, something like that, when you guys arrived there on the scene?
Oh, I think it was like 0 churches.
Oh, it was 0. Okay, it was less.
Yeah, because it was a non-denominational parachurch mission organization.
Okay, gotcha. So you guys didn't even have any parish
that then morphed into a church.
Gotcha.
Because of the result of the mission work.
Yeah.
The church grew. Isn't that the goal of mission?
Theoretically.
Yeah.
So, I mean, numbers, I think, are the things that speak the loudest. I think some people like to think about, philosophical changes. But y'all saw a lot of churches planted since 1998.
Yeah.
Can you guys speak a little bit to that?
Yes. So part of the way that we really embraced these low caste and untouchable people was really sharing with them what the love of God can do in their lives. Yeah. And they found that so remarkable that they just wanted to embrace Jesus in whatever way they could. And so we really just started gathering them together for worship and teaching and prayer and the breaking of bread. And it was really like a New Testament wave of gathering fellowships together.
Yeah.
And so basically from like 1998 to about 2003, it was all very informal.
Yeah.
And we didn't even really know what we were doing at that time.
Yeah.
We were just kind of gathering folks together, and it turned out to be, groups of 20, 25, 30, and
Yeah.
they would gather together maybe on a Sunday, maybe on a Thursday, whenever they could.
Right.
And it was a lot of discipleship going on because a lot of people were really coming to know Christ, and it was very, very good. In 2003, we did a survey because we had heard that there were a lot of these little groups. And we did this survey, and we learned that there were 1,500 of these little fellowships that
Oh,
had
my
popped up in
goodness.
5 years. And we realized that we had to do something about this. This wasn't just some little parachurch organization anymore. This was a movement of God.
Yeah.
It was like this Macedonian call to the nation,
Yeah.
And we were very excited. And so that's when they incorporated the Good Shepherd Church of India, and they started on day one with 1,500 of these little fellowships.
Oh my goodness.
Through the years, they just kept on faithfully adding leaders, adding priests, adding pastors. They were pastors at that time. And they wanted to be very careful about how they did church,
Yeah.
how they did worship, how they structured everything. And so they took 8 years from 2003 until 2011 to study the scriptures, study church history, study all the different denominations and mainstream denominations, all of this, to figure out what was going to be the best fit for the low caste folks, for the untouchables, just as far as their culture goes, what they needed. And they settled on the Anglican tradition.
Yeah.
They felt that this three-stream convergent model of evangelical, charismatic, and liturgical approach to Christianity was going to be really, really good, because it was going to be so educational for these folks.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these people, maybe they had heard about Jesus before, but they certainly didn't know what to do in church.
Sure.
If you and I were atheists in America, and all of a sudden we went to church one day, we'd know what to do.
Of course,
Because you
yeah.
see it in the movies,
Yeah.
you see it on TV, maybe you've gone with grandma to Easter one time,
Right.
We'd know what to do. But these people in the far-flung villages of India had no clue what to do in
Yeah.
a church service. And so they would walk in and be completely unknowing of what to do. And so we had to, from day one, teach them what church is. And so the Anglican tradition and all of the historical prayers, the liturgy, the Eucharist, the creeds, taught them so much about what the faith is.
Yeah.
And it was just such a beautiful expression, and it was all translated into the different languages around the nation. And so they weren't doing it in English, they were doing it in their own mother tongue.
Wow.
And again, using the lectionary as far as, what scriptures for every week and what people were preaching from. And, it was just a very beautiful, one church type expression. And so that was 2011, and then by the time we left in India in 2017, it had grown to 4,000 of these groups all over, and it was just a remarkable thing to watch how many people were embracing Jesus and just wanting to get together. And the average size also had grown from 20 to 150.
Oh my goodness.
So, we had larger churches that were like 1,000
Yeah.
and smaller churches that were 20, but it was an average size of about 150. And one of the very interesting things is that across North India especially, the believers there didn't know that there were other believers.
Wow.
And so, they would go to their own little group meeting, worship meeting on Sunday or whatever, and they would enjoy that. But they didn't know that there were other people who worshiped Jesus. And so what we started to do was we started to have something called a Jesus festival, or in the local language it was called a Yesu Mahotsav. And so we would gather all the different fellowship groups from all the places around the area, like within a, 50-mile radius, and say, come to this one place.
Yeah.
And so 10,000 people at a go would come together, And the look on their faces when they would come to this tent, big gathering tent, and see that there were other people who also loved Jesus.
You believe in Jesus as well? And they were just shocked.
And they would have worship, and they would have fellowship, and they would it was such a wonderful time, and they would go home refreshed and empowered and bolstered in their faith because they knew that this was one global church that they were a part of, and they didn't need to be afraid anymore. They knew that they had brothers and sisters in other places, and it was just such a wonderful, wonderful thing for them.
That's incredible.
So,
one of the things that has, I think, been really shocking the past 2 years is the way that coronavirus has affected churches. And some of my friends have been really surprised. There was just a Barna Group and Christianity Today both released studies this week that 1 in 3 Christians in the United States are not coming back to church at all. And when they're asked about it, their statement is, I'm not going back to church. So given that Western trajectory, we'd think that the same thing would have been the case in India as well. So you guys went from 4,000 churches down to 2,500 churches or something like that. But that's not what happened.
That's not the case. No. So it was remarkable. The coronavirus hit India very, very hard. The official numbers say that, as per the number of cases, that India was number 2 in the world. America was number 1 for number of cases, and India was number 2. But with 1.4, the official cases. But with 1.4 billion people in India, how in the world could they have been number 2? They had to have been number 1. And so India got hit very hard. In 2020, India actually gave away most of its vaccines and medications because they just would not admit that they had coronavirus in the country. And so they were giving it away to other countries, America included. And so then when it came to 2021, they had this huge wave of outbreak of the virus, and then they didn't have enough medicines for their own people. Eventually they reproduced it, and it was all ended up being okay, and now they're doing much better. But a lot of people died. A lot of people had the virus, and the main culprit for the deaths was lack of access to healthcare. Tangentially, Good Shepherd was able to open 45 medical clinics during COVID, just because we had people in all the right places, and we started a very robust telehealth ministry. And we were able to help like 1 million people over the course of the 18 months that the virus was really there. But that's just such a wonderful blessing, and we're very thankful that we were able to help so many people. So with the virus hitting India so hard, people were not only upset and desperate because of the health crisis, but also India had a huge economic crisis. We felt it some in America, and I think we're still recovering a bit from it. But in India, it was devastating. People lost their jobs overnight. And when I'm talking about jobs, I'm not talking about white-collar jobs. I'm talking about daily wage earners who... If that means they go to the fields, they pick the crops, they get paid for that day, and they eat with that money. If they don't get paid that day, they don't eat. And so starvation was a real issue, and people were they were borrowing money left and right, and this is from loan sharks that charge 150% interest, so they'll be in debt bondage for a very long time. And so people were just desperate beyond belief. And all of this desperation led them to realize that they had no hope in their lives. There was no hope that they could access. They didn't have hope of health. They didn't have hope of economics. And so what were they going to do? And our teams of, our evangelists, for lack of a better word, were able to still kind of go house to house to visit people during COVID. They couldn't do big film shows or rallies or whatever, but they were able to do personal counseling and prayer with people one-on-one. And they were able to be the ones to come to these desperate people and say, you can find hope in Jesus. And through all of that personal counseling, personal prayer, they were able to start what we began to call them family groups. And these family groups were not just like mom, dad, and 2 kids. These were like mom, dad, kids, grandma and grandpa, and a few neighbors thrown in for good measure.
Yeah.
And so these were like groups of 20 people, and all of whom were new believers, all of whom needed to be discipled, all of whom needed Bibles in their own language. And lo and behold, these were new churches that were coming up overnight.
Wow.
And so nationwide, there were like 1,000 of these new groups that popped up during COVID.
That's crazy.
And we just couldn't believe it because the Spirit of God was still at work, even through this time of great pestilence. And on top of that, persecution against Christians is still on the rise.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something in church history that says during times of great pestilence and persecution, the Church of God grows.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we were experiencing in India. And people were just coming to Christ like crazy because they realized that God was the only hope and their only source of love during that time. And now it's our great privilege to now take that relationship forward with them and disciple them and take them into the future.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and there's been history of that within the ministry as well, because every time that the church has that Christians have responded to natural disasters, the earthquake that happened in Gujarat, the tsunami that happened on the east coast of India, cyclones, super cyclones, all these different natural disasters, drought, flood, all kinds of different crazy things that happen. And when the church goes in and responds and simply shows people the genuine love of Christ in helping meet their tangible needs with no strings attached.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a part of our church. You don't have to believe anything. We love you because God loves you.
Yeah.
And we simply want you to experience that love of God. And they respond because they see how they're treated by the world around them.
Yeah.
And they see how they're treated by the Christian community. And they say there's something there.
Yeah.
And they're attracted to it. And I think that's an important lesson for us as the church to learn. If we are the church, people will respond.
Yeah.
And we've seen it time and time again in India. So to see 1,000 new groups start in India during the time of COVID, when everybody else would have expected the thing would have disintegrated, it's nothing but, I think God's got a sense of humor of, just wait until they see what I have in mind.
Right.
But yeah, it's incredible to watch. And you can't explain it. It isn't, this genius plan of man that we've come up with this. Here's how we're going to, we're going to sort of pivot this whole thing and it's going to work to our advantage. We're just simply responding to the opportunity that God puts in our laps and out of obedience saying, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And he honors it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really just so important that our huge philosophy in the Good Shepherd Church of India is to be the hands and feet of Jesus to everyone around us.
Yeah.
And, like Kevin said, just showing that love to be the genuine love of Jesus is a lesson that we here in America need to embrace.
Yeah.
And I think that is being the church to one another.
Yeah.
And I think that is how our churches here in the U.S. are going to grow.
Yeah.
Whether that's on Sunday morning or whether that's just going throughout the week.
Yeah.
And that's I'm a big proponent of what I call missional living, which means having the mission of Christ always in your brain, so that whenever you are interacting with anyone, whether that's you're having coffee with somebody or you're in the supermarket line or you're in traffic, you want to treat everyone around you as Christ would treat them, and knowing that God has a plan for that person and you are a part of that plan right in that moment.
Yeah.
And what a divine privilege it is to be able to love that person in that moment.
Yeah. Well, and Jesus says it, it's so easy to throw away his new commandment from John 13. They'll know you.
Yeah.
They'll be able to identify Christians all based on their love.
Yeah.
So, God, I would just ask you 100 more questions. So, one other thing I just wanted to ask you guys about is another fallacy that some Christians are working hard to sort of debunk is this idea that persecution has ended. You guys have really alluded to a couple examples, but you haven't talked about your own personal experience, because there's a real way in which y'all, just for being Westerners and Christians, experience persecution in India as well.
Yeah, we always knew that it was a possibility that God might not want us to be in India for the rest of our lives. When we first went there, we said, we're going to be here for the rest of our lives. We're giving our lives to this nation and to these people. But we also then sort of learned to hold that a little bit loosely and say, okay, God, if you have something else for us, you're going to have to make that abundantly clear, because selfishly, we love being here. We love these people. We love what we get to do. And you're going to have to make it very, very clear that our time is up. Which he did. He took us at our word on that. So we had the experience, I'll say the unfortunate experience, of the Indian government eventually making it abundantly clear to us that we were no longer welcome in their country.
Yeah.
And I had left to go to a 3-day conference in Thailand. And so I packed my little hand luggage and went to my conference and came back. And that's when it was made clear to me I was no longer going to be allowed to enter the country, and was put back on a plane. The very plane I came in on, they put me right back on the very same plane and sent me back to Thailand. And which I won't bore you with all the details of that, but it was, let's just call it an unpleasant experience. Yeah. She was actually at the airport to pick me up, and so I was able to call her and say, they're not letting me in, go home, and book me a hotel in Bangkok, and I'll call you when I get there. And little did we know that the very next morning, hardly 10 hours later, the police would be at our door, providing her with a notice that she had to leave immediately.
Yeah.
And this is, 20 years of our life that they're now saying, out you go.
Yeah.
And there was a whole bunch that was behind this. But the fact that we were Christians, the fact that there were known people who were behind this. And we knew the people who were behind this. These were not strangers. These were, many of them, people that had been in our homes. Yeah. We had been to their homes. We had broken bread together. It was painful, to say the least, to have been betrayed by people that we thought we knew and trusted. And so, because she was still in the country, she was able to fight the process of getting kicked out differently than I was, because I was technically outside the country at immigration. And so we were physically separated for a few months while she was in India. This began in January of that year. And by the second week of April, then she was back to the U.S. And so we were reunited in April and essentially left everything behind. 20 years of our life and whatever fit into a couple of suitcases. I had left with my hand luggage.
Yeah.
I literally had like 3 changes of clothes. And when she left, they were able to take a couple of suitcases with them. But everything left behind. And so we really, truly started over when we got to the U.S. and took some time and just prayed, God, what do you have in store for us? And I remember actually when I first arrived in the U.S., having just been kicked out, I spent a couple of days in Thailand and then eventually came to the U.S. And actually Bishop D'Souza was coming to Dallas. And so I'd arranged to meet him in Dallas, was the first place that I flew to, and he was going to be there for a couple of days. And so I was going to drive him around, and we spent some time kind of talking about it. And he challenged me that the first evening that he and I were together, the trauma of all of it still fresh. We still didn't know what was happening exactly. And we were sitting at dinner one night, and he said, Kevin, he said, the thing you have to remember is we've prayed for years that we would have a strong presence in America that truly understood the work.
Yeah.
What if you guys are the answer to that prayer?
Yeah.
And tears just pouring down my face, and I'm like, oh, why would you say that? But in hindsight, we've realized that it really was true that God was able to take what a certain group of people meant for evil, and to turn that into something good, and to be able to tell the story and to share our experience and to help other people to understand the work in India in a way that, because we have ministry reps and different things that well-intentioned and they do their best, but they didn't understand it and experience it like we did. And so it really was, Sheldon Van Auken wrote a book called A Severe Mercy. And which sounds like such a crazy, sort of oxymoronic title. And yet, in some ways, our leaving India was a severe mercy. It was God's way of orchestrating his perfect plan, not our perfect plan. And, we had a lot of stuff to deal with. I mean, it was traumatic. It was difficult. Our kids were 13 and 15 at the time. Yeah. And India was all that they'd known. They were born there, they'd visited the U.S., a handful of times, but had never lived here. And so there was all sorts of stuff for us to work through. But we came to realize that the price that we pay is so small compared to the many in India who truly had no other option. I mean, in our case, we could, flee back to another country, and but they can't go anywhere. They have no option but to stand and face it. And I think the passion that they do it with. I mean, I'll tell one story of a young man who was on one of our teams, had gone into a very, very difficult area, and was sharing about Jesus in this one village. And as they were getting ready to pack up and leave to go back to where they were staying, a group of fanatics from the village got a hold of him and just beat the living tar out of him, and literally left him for dead on the side of the road. They thought they had killed him and left him for dead on the side of the road. And some other people passed by, happened to see him. And this story could be repeated any number of different times, but this was one young man that we knew. And thankfully, some people found him, were able to get him to some early medical treatment, and realized he needed a higher level of care, and got a hold of our office, and we were able to rush and get him the help that he needed. And he had skull fractures, he had punctured lung, he had all sorts of cuts and abrasions. I mean, he was in bad shape. Yeah. And he spent some time in the hospital. We were able to get him the treatment that he needed. And when he was recovering, we were taking him from the hospital, intending to take him back to his home where he could rest and recover the rest of the way. And he asked, where are we going? And we said, well, we're going to take you home. He said, no, don't take me home. And we said, well, where do you want to go? He says, I want to go back to the very place that this all happened. And why in the world would you want to do this? And he says, the fact that they were willing to do this to me means that just shows how desperately they need Jesus. And he wanted to go back to the very place that had tried to kill him. Yeah. And I think we just don't understand what persecution looks like. Yeah. We don't get it. We face the slightest little inconvenience and we throw our hands in the air. Well, it's not meant to be. And when you face that level of difficulty, and to do it with such conviction and really such joy, to be able to say, I get to serve Jesus in this way. Yeah. It's so different. Yeah. And I look at even our experience and I think, we don't have much to complain about. God has been so good to us. Yeah. The generosity of God's people, he has poured out favor in our lives in ways that we just, quite frankly, don't deserve. And so I always try to make sure that we understand that we point people back to the daily reality of people who face life and death because of their faith, not just inconvenience. Yeah. And I think that's an important part of the story is really understanding that it is life and death for them. And the repercussions of claiming Jesus are very, very real.
So there's a lot of important stuff we've talked about, but I want to just talk about the most important thing. You could have moved to any state when you came back to the United States, and a few people from the South understand this, but you picked the best state, Indeed. Arguably in the world, Indeed. Right, to go to. That's right. The frozen tundra of Minnesota.
Absolutely.
So how's life been back in where I think Jesus was born? I think there's some truth to the Mormons. Like Jesus was born here in the States. They just got the wrong.
Well, a lot of people don't understand is the whole walking on water thing actually happened in Minnesota when it was frozen.
Right.
And
the only way it could happen.
Yeah.
I tell you, we love Minnesota. People all complain about the cold weather and the constant snow and the iciness and all of that. We love it. We lived in India for 20 years where the temperature never got below 90 degrees.
And the humidity.
Humidity. There's never a change in season. And so we're like, bring on the snow and the coats and the warm weather and the wool, or the cold weather, and the wool socks and all of that. And, people are so nice and, they might be passive aggressive, but that's okay,
That's what Minnesota nice means.
Yeah, that's right.
We're nice to you in front of your face.
That's right.
Minnesota nice is sort of like the bless your heart here
exactly
in the South.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, what does the future look like for Good Shepherd? Clearly, you guys you're still on the ground. What are you doing now that you're not living in the country, that you're in Minnesota?
Yeah, we get the great privilege of all day, every day, telling the story to interested people here in America.
Cool.
I personally am a church representative, so I am going around to all kinds of churches all over the country. I'm basically in a different church almost every weekend of every month.
Awesome.
I'm spending a lot of time in the Anglican Church of North America. We have about 30 or 35 partners now within the Anglican Church of North America,
Amazing.
which is really fantastic. And just sharing with anyone who will listen about what Good Shepherd is doing in India. I drink a lot of coffee, and so I'm constantly wired and sleep in a lot of different beds all the time. But, we're in a stage of life when we can do that, and I just think I have the very best job in the world. Good Shepherd is going to continue expanding the work. One of the unwritten rules of Good Shepherd is that we do something in a small way, then we do it in a medium way, and then we do it in a big way.
Yeah.
And over the years, we've done a lot of small things, we've done a few medium things, which means we're ready and primed to do some things in a very big way now. And so we're just getting ready to open up our National Cathedral in the headquarters base there, which will seat about 2,000 people. That's been a project about 7 years in the making, so that's going to open up soon. We're also working on a hospital, which is going to end up being a sustainable project that's going to fund all of our medical clinics all over India. And we're just really looking forward to this next generation of leadership kind of taking over from the old guard and seeing where we can go. A lot of professionalism, a lot of new, vibrant ideas going into it. We're just getting ready also to ordain about 1,000 deacons to take over some of the lower level leadership in some of these new groups that have popped up over COVID.
Yeah.
And so we're really excited about what God is doing. Yeah.
That's incredible.
And that heart of training in preparing the next generation has been part of the organization's ethos from the very beginning. And so it's a natural step to be able to look at and say, each step along the way has prepared the ground for the next and given the capacity to be ready for the next level of growth. And so that's really pouring into that next generation and continuing to make sure that they're ready, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be leading the church in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
And so really making sure that they're solidly grounded and prepared. So she gets to work with churches, and I get to work with a number of the donors that support the work from all around the country, and get to meet some really, really interesting people and hear their stories and what brought them to partner with us in the work in India. And again, for me to be able to share with them some of our experiences of how their money has been blessing people in India and helping enable this growth that's taken place. Because the reality is it costs money to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And so we get the opportunity to work with people and to see them engage in ways and be blessed as they continue to recognize, here's my role in what God's doing in India. Yeah. I get to be a part of what God's doing in India, and to see that light go on for them of, wow, what a great privilege.
Yeah.
We love it. We think we've got the best jobs in the world. Yeah.
So if someone would want to get in touch with y'all or learn more about Good Shepherd, how would they do so?
Yeah, you can. We have a website. It's gsi.org.
Okay.
Like Good Shepherd
Easy.
India. gsi.org is our website. You can also contact me. I don't know. You'll put my
all your information.
All my information in the show notes, or whatever they call them here. You can contact me anytime, and I'm always willing to talk about India to anyone who will listen.
Cool.
And drink coffee.
And drink a lot of coffee.
Well, I don't know if people say this to you often, but thank you for this work that you're doing. I just, I often doing work in ministry, I often put myself in the position where I think about standing before the throne of God on that last day, because I have a lot to account for. but I'm excited to be there on the day when you stand before the throne, because I think that this brings so much joy to our Father's heart. So thank you. Yeah. All right, but thanks for being here. I know you flew all the way down to Atlanta just to sit down with me.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Worth the trip.
I want to publicly thank Kevin and Leah for sitting down with me and having that long conversation. They live in Minnesota, as you probably heard from the podcast, and they took some time to come down to Atlanta to get a bunch of business done, but also to spend some time with me and my family, which is, as you can imagine, is quite an ordeal. But they were very gracious, incredibly loving, and as you just heard from that incredible testimony, faithful servants of God who I am in awe of, just proud to know. So just publicly want to thank Kevin and Leah for taking time to sit down with me and have that little conversation. I also want to invite you, if you live in and around the Buford area, maybe to come in and have a conversation with us at Good Samaritan Anglican Church. We've been in operation for almost a year, coming in May 2022. It'll be a year. And maybe you are looking also to be part of the same sort of transformation that we just heard Kevin and Leah describe they were part of in India. I think that that's what we're doing here at Good Samaritan Anglican Church in Buford. So wherever you are on your journey to Christ, I welcome you to join us and have a conversation with Jesus about who he is and what he wants to do in your life. God bless you. I hope to hear from you soon.